Now, to the crucial and very expensive issue of border security. Is the money we spend on offshore detention worth it? The Greens have released their asylum seeker policy, and it's claimed that each detainee on Christmas Island costs Australian taxpayers $1,500 a day. Now, that adds up to about $550,000 per asylum seeker per year.
And we'll be talking about the bold new plans for offshore detention and where immigration policy heads into the future shortly with our panel from around the country. But first, 7 News reporter Mike Duffy has this exclusive report on the men and women on the front line of Operation Sovereign Borders.
These are the serene islands of Australia's northern border, and this is the Australian Border Force. They police one of the world's longest and most difficult maritime boundaries and can spend up to a month at sea.
It's a big border, big coastline.
7 News joined the crew of the Thyack, a vessel usually stationed at Ashmore Reef. This island is Australian soil. Just across that water is Papua New Guinea, and not much further, Indonesia.
It's an ongoing operation. The area they cover is vast, which means having officers on the sea, but also in the air.
Climb aboard a Border Force helicopter and the scale of the task becomes clear.
You can get a call and we can be on board and we can be on the islands in a very short period of time to respond to any incursions that may land on any of these islands.
Officers intercept small boats operating at the border.
Zulu 110, this is Zulu 11 Bravo.
Illegal immigration remains a problem. PNG Islanders are allowed to visit Australian soil without a passport or visa.
Australian Border Force.
Sending some back home can be a battle.
It's one of the gateway points for vessels arriving in for Papua New Guinea.
Those seized at sea will find themselves here, an onboard detention area.
Have a look inside here. This is something that few people will see. 2 bunks on the lower level, in fact 3 if you count that one there, and then they just build them up towards the ceiling.
Commanding Officer David Auld knows unexpected passengers are always a possibility.
Once people hit land, it's harder to deal with, so we try and do all our work away from the coast.
Last month, 7 News travelled to Indonesia, where thousands of asylum seekers have massed in the regions surrounding Jakarta.
How many of you want to go to Australia?
We travelled to Puncak, an area that has long provided rich pickings for people smugglers. Yet nobody we spoke with was planning to board a people smuggling vessel. Some say that could change.
They're waiting for Australian election, the new party.
All the while, Border Force ships like the Thyack and Roebuck remain at the ready.
It's obviously pretty complex and quite important work they do. But so far, border security has been off the radar this year. With an election looming, though, on July the 2nd, it could change.
Yeah, so let's put it to our panel. Immigration Minister Peter Dutton, Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, human rights lawyer Daniel Webb, political commentator Chris Kenny and Chris Smith from radio station 2GB. Good morning to you all. Thanks for joining us. So let's start with you, Minister. $1,500 per person in detention. The government's own Commission of Audit says that's more than 10 times more expensive than processing them onshore. Given the budget issues, is it time to shut down or wind back offshore detention?
Well, I think we've just got to have a look at what's happening in Europe at the moment, where millions of people are crossing borders, and it's a significant issue. And it would be for us if we allowed our borders to reopen again. When Labor came to power in 2007, there were 4 people in detention. That number went to 10,200. 50,000 people came on 800 boats. We've now got the number from 10 or just over 10,000 down to about 650, and that includes no children in detention at all. So the disaster would be if boats restarted, if people smugglers got back into business. And as you saw in the clip before, people do believe that if there's a change of government at the next election, the people smugglers will be back in business. And the greatest tragedy of all of that is not the cost, it's the 1,200 people that drowned at sea. And we've had no reported deaths at sea since Operation Sovereign Borders has come into place. And it's a policy that works, and I think it would be a national disgrace if Labor were to be re-elected and to undo it again as they did after John Howard lost power in 2007.
Thanks, Minister. Senator Hanson-Young, I mean, there are a couple of sides to this issue, well, many sides, but, you know, there's a humanitarian side to the issue, and the Minister has sort of addressed that vis-a-vis the drownings at sea in some ways, but there's also the economic side, and you say it's time for a rethink on both of those things. What would the Greens do differently?
Well, of course, Peter Dutton, as Immigration Minister, wants the Australian public to believe that there's only two options, that either people have to find their own way by boat here to Australia and risk the dangerous journey, or we have to run these gulags in places like Nauru and Manus Island, these detention camps that damage very severely the mental health of children and the families who are kept there. Well, I'm here to say that actually it doesn't have to be like this. There is a better way, and it's about going and finding where people currently are. We know from your clip that there are people currently waiting in Indonesia. Help the United Nations process their claims and then fly them here. Don't just thump our fists about the people smugglers. Undercut them. We know people need security. We know people need safety and protection. These are people who have fled wars around the world. Let's not lock up the children to send a message. I mean, if the only policy the government has is to lock children in detention, a system that the Australian Medical Association says is tantamount to child abuse, they're not being very innovative. We need to actually go there, help people and bring people here safely. We don't have to see them jumping on leaky boats.
Very quickly on that, presuming you could put such a system in place whereby you're more effectively processing people in their countries of origin or countries of departure rather, and you're able there to assess that some people are genuine refugees and that there we could fly them to Australia and avoid the trip, there will still be other people who are assessed as not being genuine refugees and who might still try to come anyway. What do you do about that?
Well, look, I think we've got to be clear about this, that people who need humanitarian help, people who are refugees, Australia should be helping. But someone who's had their claim assessed fairly and efficiently and is not found to be a refugee, well, that's when you send them home. And I don't want to see people taking spots from those who have genuinely fled war, need protection from persecution. But it's about doing it fast. It's about doing it efficiently and fairly. At the moment, we're spending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars detaining people on Manus Island and Nauru, and we're pushing them to breaking point. If they haven't left now, after 3 years, that's because they can't. And what we see as a result is the mental health of children in particular absolutely destroyed. Half of the children that Peter Dutton wants to send to Nauru at the moment have suffered mental illness. Now that is just horrific, and it shouldn't be seen and promoted as good government policy.
Okay, Sarah, let's bring in Chris Kenny here. Chris, you've been to Nauru and you're a supporter of offshore detention, but at $1,500 a day, I mean, couldn't that money go a long way at schools and hospitals or, better solutions for the refugee crisis?
Well, when Sarah Hanson-Young and the Labor Party had their way and we had effectively an open borders policy, it cost the Australian taxpayers well over $10 billion. It's much more expensive to have chaos and trauma and tragedy on our shores. So cost is not a good argument. I have been to Nauru. It is not a gulag. The sort of emotional stuff we hear from Sarah Hanson-Young is misleading. Of course, those asylum seekers and refugees there need to be resettled and as soon as possible. They are good people with tragic stories behind them. I've met them, but they are being treated well there. But they just need to get off that island and be resettled somewhere else as soon as possible. But the sort of solution that Sarah Hanson-Young talks about would just open up the chaos and the tragedy and the trauma again. Because if we were processing people in Indonesia, the people smugglers would have a new market to sell places to come to Indonesia and then get flown into Australia. There are more than 10 million legitimate refugees in the world, many, many more times that of displaced people or people who'd be prepared to pose as refugees to get here. The only way to manage this is to have secure borders, to stop people coming in here illegally, to free up places so that we can bring in more refugees than ever before, which is actually what's happening now. That's why we're able to bring the 12,000 refugees from Syria, is because we've regained control of our immigration system.
But they were refugees who were processed, you know, much closer to home, obviously. Chris Smith,
they were processed in Indonesia, in Syria. But
that's what I'm saying.
Well, exactly, and that's what our humanitarian program should be doing.
But most
is Australia and the UN choosing refugees based on their need, not based on who can get the money to pay a people smuggler and get here illegally.
OK, let's talk to Chris.
I think the general sentiment is that the public is actually accepting of the current situation. They're accepting of it because all of a sudden we don't have children in detention. That's got to be a great thing. More than that, we don't have a system which we tried once that led to up to 1,500 people drowning at sea. For those two reasons, yes, we have difficulty when children do get in detention with the way they are treated and possibly with the way that their mental state copes in that kind of detention, but surely these are less of the evil than what we had when the system was an open border policy where people came in, we had 50,000 walk through via illegal boats, and all those who were waiting legitimately in line in a refugee camp somewhere went to the back of the line. I think the public is happy with the way the system is. Bear in mind the Greens will fight over the philosophical nature of offshore processing and detention until the cows come home. But, you know, government portfolios are not supposed to be self-sustainable in terms of money. And I think this argument is a philosophical argument. It's not a cost argument. It's a philosophical argument. And having said that, I think at the end of the day, the public is quite happy and settled with the way the situation has developed to now.
Well, one could have both a philosophical and a cost argument at the same time. Daniel, as Chris says, it seems that most Australians have been very supportive, by and large, on the tougher laws regarding asylum seekers and detention. In your view, is there any sign that that's changing? And you know, in your view, are there reasonable alternatives to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the really hard parts of my job is that on a daily basis, I see the harm that our current policies are causing innocent people. I mean, I've sat there face to face with women who've been sexually assaulted on Nauru who can't sleep because they're terrified the immigration minister is going to send them back. So I think, you know, I'm not here to pretend this is simple, but whatever the policy challenge, knowingly harming innocent people is never the solution. We've got to look at humane alternatives. There's got to be better ways to save lives at sea than knowingly harming the people who survive.
So is that, you know, you talk about better ways. Are we talking about the sort of things that Sarah Hanson-Young is proposing, you know, better processing in the points of departure, for example, or you're talking about processing people onshore in Australia?
Well, I think our policy really has to stick to two key principles. The focus has got to be on ensuring that people who need protection can access it safely. They need safe passage. The reality is there are people in our region who need a chance to rebuild their lives. They've fled danger. Our goal is to ensure they can access that protection without having to risk their lives on a boat. The second principle is that everyone in our care, either today, tomorrow, or at any time in the future, everyone in our care must be treated with decency and respect for their basic rights. And right now, that is not happening.
Sure. Well, listen, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there. There's plenty we've got to cover yet. Yes. But it was great to get those different perspectives on the issue. Thank you very much for that.
A tough issue. Thank you
Cheers.
so much.